Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or the guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's July 17th, and we have a lot to talk about. Last week, I was in Dublin, Ireland, attending a meeting of the International Progressive MS Alliance's Scientific Steering Committee. And once again, I came away from our meeting just marveling at how extraordinary it is to see how this group of incredibly high achievers, we're talking about the best and brightest MS research minds in the world, how this group continually challenges itself, checks itself, and pushes itself to do more, to continually push forward in its mission. Personally, I've never felt more sure that we're going to figure out progressive MS, that life for millions of families battling the worst, most debilitating form of this disease is going to get better. And that's going to happen because of the commitment, the passion, the skill, and the determination of the group of remarkable men and women who make up the Progressive MS Alliance and drive its research agenda forward. If you want to learn more about the Alliance, you can visit www.progressivemsalliance.org, and I'll include a link to their website in today's show notes. Later in today's podcast, we'll be talking to Dr. Rhonda Vashkul, a world-renowned MS researcher and a trailblazer in exploring the differences between the sexes in multiple sclerosis. I had an amazing conversation with Dr. Vashkul, but before we get to that, there are a few other things that you should know about. It's well known that a high percentage of people living with MS are also living with depression and anxiety. Well, a recently published study coming out of Brazil indicates that those people living with MS and depression and anxiety may also be living with alexithymia, a psychological condition that makes it difficult for someone to describe or even process emotional responses. 180 people with relapsing remitting MS and 180 healthy subjects took part in this study. And the research team evaluated the level of disability, the level of depression and anxiety, and the level of alexithymia among the participants. Researchers noted that 93 of the group of subjects with MS showed signs of alexithymia compared to only 27 from the healthy control group. They also observed higher levels of depression and anxiety among the subjects with MS. The research team also noted a correlation between depression and anxiety and alexithymia. They found that 14% of the MS patients with depression and 30% of the MS patients with anxiety showed higher levels of alexithymia. They also found that older MS patients and MS patients without steady employment and with a lower level of education also showed higher levels of alexithymia. And among the MS patients, alexithymia was significantly influenced by their level of disability. The greater the level of disability, the higher the level of alexithymia. Given their results, the research team recommended that an MS patient's psychological well-being be more thoroughly evaluated, as it would seem that better-known mood disorders like depression and anxiety might influence the development of lesser-known psychological disorders like alexithymia. And if you'd like to find out more about this study, I'll include a link in today's show notes. If you're a regular RealTalk MS listener, then you know that when it comes to improving the well-being of people living with MS, I'm a big believer in leveraging technology in as many different ways as are possible, from developing new assistive devices to creating new ways to deliver medical treatment. Well, last year, the MS Society in the UK engaged the Newfield Trust, a healthcare think tank, to research and report on the potential of data and technology to improve the care for people living with MS. And that report has now been published. The report maps out what technology is already available for people living with MS, what more can be done with what's currently available, and how data and technology can be better leveraged to improve healthcare for people living with MS. It identifies 4 main areas where data and technology can be best leveraged to improve the quality of life for people with MS. Those 4 areas are helping people with MS take more control of their care, ensuring that care is accessible and coordinated, improving access to the right treatment at the right time, and using data to better meet patient needs. So when it comes to helping people with MS take more control of their care, the report points out that people with MS are already accessing the internet to find information about the disease, how MS progresses, identifying various symptoms, and gaining a better understanding of disease-modifying therapy options. The report underscores the fact that it can be empowering and can lead to more productive appointments with their healthcare team when people living with MS get online to check on clinical trials, find out what research might be underway, and get better prepared for an upcoming appointment with their neurologist. The report points out that apps that can help people manage the logistics of MS, reminding them to take their medication, or manage injection sites. These apps are available today, but the report reminds us that much more work needs to be done to make sure that everyone living with MS is aware of these digital tools and feels comfortable using them. Now, when it comes to ensuring that care is coordinated, the report points out how easy it is to use online tools to collect patient information, but how frustrating it is for patients to repeat the same information over and over again every time they see a specialist or another member of their healthcare team. And I have a feeling that this is something everyone listening can probably relate to. Everyone on your healthcare team should know what's going on. They should all know about your symptom management, your rehabilitation strategy, disease-modifying therapy, but very often, although that information is available, it's not always shared. It's not always easy to access, and that creates not only inefficiency, but it wastes a tremendous amount of time if you're left repeating the same information at all of your different healthcare appointments. So using technology to better manage, disseminate, share information is a low-cost, high-reward goal. The report talks about improving access to the right treatment at the right time. And we know that there are more than a dozen disease-modifying therapies for relapsing remitting MS, and we also know that they all don't work the same way for everyone. Some treatments are better than others for some patients, but there isn't enough data that can help you and your neurologist understand which treatment might be best for you. So this is a case of publishing better longitudinal data on the outcomes for people with MS. Better data means better, more highly focused treatment. And the report also underscores the need to collect and publish data on patient outcomes, not just on processes. The report goes into a tremendous amount of detail outlining specific recommendations that take the concepts that are discussed and analyzed and puts them into clear action steps. And while the report is in many ways specific to the healthcare system in the UK, its concepts and recommendations are universal and timely and important. If you'd like to gaze into the future of healthcare delivery and MS disease management, you don't need a crystal ball, but you should definitely download a copy of this report. You'll find a link in today's show notes. And while we're speaking of leveraging technology, the UK's National Health Service announced that they were planning to launch a new app in December that will allow all of the patients in the United Kingdom to book appointments, consult their medical records, and more. And while many of these features are already available online, this marks the first effort to bring them all together into one mobile app, making access to these features easier than ever before. Jeremy Hunt, the UK's Health and Social Care Secretary, said, and I'm quoting now, "Technology has transformed everyday life when it comes to banking, travel, and shopping. Health matters much more to all of us, and the prize of that same digital revolution in healthcare isn't just convenience, but lives improved, extended, and saved." End quote. Well, I think that Secretary Hunt gets it exactly right, and it's why I tend to rant about all the ways that technology can improve almost every aspect of healthcare, from making it easier to set an appointment with your doctor, to using devices like smartphones or Fitbits to automatically transmit data to your doctor so that they can better personalize your treatment, to delivering rehabilitation to your home rather than forcing you to go somewhere to get it. I think that we're at a real tipping point when it comes to leveraging digital tools to create the same level of convenience in how we receive healthcare, just as they've already changed every way that we consume content, the way that we shop, the way that we bank, the way that we search for a new job. I think Secretary Hunt said it right. Technology has already transformed our lives in so many areas by simply providing us with options that we've never had before. It's exciting to begin to see all the ways that it's going to transform the most fundamental aspect of our quality of life, and that's our health. Numbness, tingling, vision issues, and even temporary blindness are all familiar symptoms of MS. In fact, many people are given their MS diagnosis after encountering one or more of these symptoms. But a Canadian research team has just published the results of a study that suggests that being able to recognize non-traditional symptoms might allow doctors to diagnose MS sooner, as much as 5 years sooner. Researchers in 4 Canadian provinces were given funding by the National MS Society to analyze health and clinical data for 17,000 Canadians who were eventually diagnosed with MS and 80,000 Canadians who either had other medical conditions or no health issues at all. The research team screened for hospital visits, physician visits, and even prescriptions in a 5-year period leading up to the first recognized neurological symptom of MS. And they found that people with MS were significantly more likely to have gone to doctors or hospitals for nervous system conditions, skeletal muscular complaints, sensory issues, vague or undefined symptoms, and mental health disorders. Compared to people who were never diagnosed with MS, they were more likely to consult neurologists, psychiatrists, and urologists, and they were more likely to be prescribed drugs. Now, interestingly, they were less likely to see a doctor for pregnancy. There's been accumulating evidence that non-specific symptoms, non-traditional symptoms, can occur before a person even develops those familiar MS symptoms like numbness or tingling. Finding a way to identify and better recognize these non-traditional symptoms that lead to a diagnosis of MS means we can diagnose MS sooner and begin treatment that can mitigate the disease progression. This represents the first study that begins to map out the health issues and non-traditional symptoms that may be occurring years before any traditional MS symptoms are identified. And that might give researchers a better understanding of what causes MS, and it will certainly give clinicians a head start in treating MS. And there's already a lot of research that confirms that the earlier MS gets treated, the more effectively it can be managed. So this study represents some very good news, and you'll find a link to the study in the show notes. Researchers at the University of California, San Francisco are recruiting African Americans living with MS in the United States to participate in a study. Genes are known to play a role in determining who is susceptible to developing multiple sclerosis, and genes may also influence the course of the disease. So identifying the exact location of MS genes in our DNA could help determine who's at risk for developing the disease and may provide clues to its cause, its prevention, and can even lead to better treatment. So focusing on ethnic groups with lower susceptibility to MS, such as African Americans, and higher susceptibility, such as individuals of Northern European descent, and searching for what is common and what is different in their genes may help pinpoint regions that contain MS genes within our DNA and help researchers understand any differences that might exist. So this study will examine the DNA from blood samples taken from African Americans, looking for what's common and what's different between these genes and the genes from groups of people of Northern European descent who are statistically more likely to be diagnosed with MS. Now, it's not necessary to travel to San Francisco to participate in the study. Once you've completed an initial online intake form and you've agreed to participate, they'll mail you links to 2 additional online forms, and you'll also receive a kit in the mail. The kit includes a consent form, a health information privacy form, and a medical records release form. The kit also includes everything necessary for a blood draw, which can be taken to your local Quest Diagnostics lab, where the blood can be drawn and then returned in a prepaid envelope to the UCSF MS Genetics Lab. And there's absolutely no cost to study participants for any of this. If you're interested in participating in this study, you can contact the research team by email at msdb@ucsf.edu, or you can call them at area code 415-502-7202. That email address is msdb@ucsf.edu, and the phone number is area code 415-502-7202, and we'll include that email address in today's show notes. Last November, I had a conversation with Dr. Rhonda Vashkul, the director of the Multiple Sclerosis Program at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA and the Jack H. Skirball Professor of Multiple Sclerosis Research. We talked about gender differences in MS, and I think that this is a particularly interesting and important topic because MS is a disease that affects men and women in profoundly different ways. Women are 3 times more likely to get MS, but when men do get multiple sclerosis, their disability can be far greater. Dr. Vashkul is responsible for first identifying that understanding the gender differences in the disease is an important part of understanding MS. I don't know if podcasts actually have greatest hits, but if they do, then I'd nominate my conversation with Dr. Vashkul as one of our greatest hits. If you missed it, here's your chance to hear it. And if you were already listening to the podcast last November, well, this conversation is worth hearing again. My guest today is Dr. Rhonda Vashkul, the director of the Multiple Sclerosis Program at UCLA, and the Jack H. Skirball Professor of Multiple Sclerosis Research. And we're talking about gender differences in MS. And this is such an interesting and important topic because MS is a disease where the difference between men and women is pretty glaring. Women tend to be somewhere around 3 times more likely to get MS, but men often develop more significant disabilities from MS. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Vashkul. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, if we go back in time a little bit, about 25 years ago to your days as a postdoctoral fellow, the scientific community didn't seem overly interested in understanding why diseases behave differently in men and women. But last year, when the National Institutes of Health announced a new requirement that all NIH-funded preclinical studies include males and females, they cited your findings in sex differences in MS as a rationale for their new policy. So it seems that a lot's changed over the past couple of decades, and a lot of that change is due to your work. I'm curious about what initially interested you in looking at sex differences in multiple sclerosis.
My view is that diseases are very difficult to understand, and any clue that we can get from naturally occurring things that happen that could lead us to new treatments would be the way to go. It's called bedside to bench to bedside, so instead of starting with a molecule of interest that may or may not be important in a disease, I think it's better to start with the clinical observation that is clearly true in a disease, and then try to figure that out at the laboratory bench and find the molecules, and then turn that into hopefully a clinical trial. So I view the sex difference as a major insight into the disease. And as you said, there are two major insights within that, and that is it can tell us why the fact that females get the disease so much more frequently than males do probably is related to something with the immune system. And by the same token, the fact that when men get MS, they do worse could tell us a whole lot about the way the brain reacts to an immune injury. So I view these things as clinical observations that are extremely important, and if we could just figure them out, we would have some real inroads into not only understanding the disease, but to develop some treatments to reverse these processes.
Well, one of the observations that an awful lot of people seem to make is that during pregnancy, women with MS have fewer relapses and they tend to feel better than they usually do. Why is that?
That's a very good question. And so the way we viewed it was to say, well, when does this happen? And when it happens actually is the third trimester, or even the last half of pregnancy. Women feel great. Their symptoms feel very good. The relapse rates are reduced more than any of the drugs available currently. And so, again, we said if we could just figure this out, maybe we would really have something. And so what we did is we went one by one looking at the factors that occur not early during pregnancy when there's really not that much of an effect, but late in pregnancy when we know there's this dramatic protection from the disease. And so when we looked late, we focused on hormones that tend to be very high during late pregnancy, and then interestingly, they drop abruptly after the woman delivers. So those hormones involved estradiol, which is the classic estrogen that's there during the ovulatory cycle, of course, at much lower levels that are fluctuating with the cycle. Progesterone, which is also made during the menstrual cycle, but a really interesting other estrogen called estriol. Estriol is not there usually when women are not pregnant because it's made by the fetal placental unit. And all estrogens are not alike. So this particular estrogen is extremely safe. It's safer than the other estrogens because it binds to a receptor that doesn't cause deleterious side effects. And what we wanted to do is we said we may not understand all the reasons, but let's just stick to as close as we can to late pregnancy. Since estriol was the hormone of late pregnancy and not there otherwise, we thought there must be something about this particular estrogen that is probably mediating the protection. So we went to the animal model and we tried each one of these things. And progesterone in our hands didn't do too much to the MS model, but estradiol and estriol were both extremely very protective. They both reduce the immune attack as well as, and this is importantly, as well as bind to cells within the brain to make them more resilient so that they don't undergo degeneration, and also in some cases cause them to repair and cause remyelination and sparing of nerves. Now with respect to estradiol versus estriol, the two different estrogens, we like estriol better because it's the estrogen of pregnancy, but also because estriol is so much safer than estradiol. It's even safer than estradiol as used in, say, birth control pills or HRT. Estriol is extremely safe and it's going to be very well tolerated and something that people could take for many years. So that's why we now have done 3 phase 2 clinical trials of estriol in multiple sclerosis, giving a dose, of course, that recapitulates a pregnancy level in the patient's blood.
And it sounds that like the outcome of those trials has been pretty positive.
It has been. It actually couldn't be better. So with the first clinical trial that we did, it was a small pilot trial, and it was published in the Annals of Neurology where we gave estriol, and the outcome measure was a biomarker, which is enhancing lesions on brain MRIs. We scanned people every month, and we saw that there was a 70 to 80% reduction in enhancing lesions. That was, of course, a big step forward to keep going. And so then we designed another trial, and this was at 16 sites across the United States, and it was published in 2016 in Lancet Neurology. This was also a phase 2 trial, but it was unique. It didn't have a biomarker as a primary outcome. it actually had a clinical FDA approvable outcome, namely relapses. And this is because the NIH funded it and this is what they wanted. And so we had, as the primary outcome measure, a reduction in relapses, and as secondary or exploratory outcomes, the effect on cognition and effects on fatigue. And so we were extraordinarily happy to see that we hit our outcome as designed. It was 164 patients, half were treated with placebo and half with estriol. We added it on to Copaxone, by the way, because we needed to give all the patients standard of care, which is an MS drug, Copaxone. And so over and above what Copaxone does for MS, we reduced relapses further as designed and hit our outcome, and in addition saw beneficial hints that there might also be something going on with improving cognition, which is also extremely exciting and consistent with previous work about estrogens being neuroprotective and being good for cognition. So now what we've done is we have done three things. We have designed another clinical trial that is actually almost done enrolling. We can take about 3 more patients, so if somebody's out there, just email me or contact UCLA MS program. And that is now having cognition as the primary outcome measure. So now we're enrolling patients specifically for the cognitive outcome. It'll be done enrolling in about a month or two, and then they'll take drugs for about a year. Well, it'll be 12 months exactly, either estriol or placebo. And we'll see with cognition as a primary, whether we can see that improvement in cognition. Notably, this is not a decline in loss of cognition, but is actually taking people who have cognitive decline and making them better. So there aren't very many drugs out there in Alzheimer's or MS or anywhere else which you actually see improvement. Most drugs will slow degeneration, but not very many at all will cause actually improvement or recovery or repair from some of these disabilities. The other thing that we've done, in addition to having this third trial, the second one on cognition, now almost done enrolling, is we had Quintiles, which is a global CRO, do a third-party analysis of our Lancet Neurology paper results, and they validated that. That's important because that's the next step for planning a phase 3 trial of estriol, which we're now in the stages of doing, and have just received another grant, which there's going to be a press release in a month or two, but I don't want to say it's anonymous, but we now have a planning grant to plan a phase 3 trial of estriol, and it'll be global in its nature. So we're extremely excited, and we're pushing forward. It's a very unusual situation, of course, not to have a pharmaceutical company doing this, but for us to be doing it as an academic with nonprofits.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as you're talking, I mean, you're getting me excited about the prospects here. But I'm wondering, given the fact that we're dealing with a hormone and a pharmaceutical company, assuming they can't patent that, how difficult is it to get their buy-in to be able to take this to the step of creating a practical therapy down the road?
It's been the biggest hurdle we've had. I think that if there's a drug out there that is straightforward, it's going to be hard. If it's not a patent-protected drug where it's a secret molecule, those are much easier. Big pharmaceutical companies love those because they can get a patent on them, and it's a secret. It's easy to control it. We do have, the other thing we're doing is we have already developed the next generation estriol, which is a pure ER beta ligand that goes to the brain and it stays there, and that's going to be an easy cell, of course, because it's a secret on the chemistry of how we're doing that. But estriol itself is difficult because it's a biologic. It's something that it's not a secret about what it is. The only thing that we have, which is worthwhile, I shouldn't say only, but UCLA, we have a patent which is the dose of estriol and the dose of the progesterone and how you would take it and how you would package it. So we do have a patent around, I guess, new use for an old drug and how to do it and what the progesterone with it would be, and to make a convenience sort of a situation out of it. But no, it's not a secret, and that makes it extraordinarily difficult.
This is both exciting and potentially a little frustrating too. And if I'm feeling that, I can only imagine that's something that you've lived with far longer than I. But
I have, and I think it's a concern for actually drug development. I really do. I think that it's a shame how many things that academics and physicians come up with that are really good ideas, and we're not thinking about starting companies. We're just not. This kind of like, it's not our expertise, but you just wonder how many things people just get frustrated. But I'm not going to stop because I know that it works and I know that it's safe. And so, we are going to we've developed the next generation estriol, and it's a secret, it's a chemical, and that's fine, but I'm not going to walk away from something that I know has already been given in multiple trials, and it's been given for HRT, for hot flashes in Europe and Asia. I know it's safe, and so I just can't walk away from something that I know that works and is safe.
And I bet an awful lot of people listening to this are incredibly glad to hear you say that too. I so appreciate you taking the time to walk us through something that I think is really exciting. There aren't a lot of people who are dealing with MS therapies that can say it works and it's safe, and you've said that 3 or 4 times already. So I only look forward to the next time we get to talk, maybe once your phase 3 is rolling or concluded. And I really look forward to hearing the next steps taken in this particular realm. It sounds incredibly promising.
Yeah, I would like to say something good about the NIH. I think they've gotten a lot of, there's two ways to look at trying to do sex differences work in both females and males. I think it's extremely important. Of course I do, but it's really a win-win. Let me put it this way. If an investigator has a finding, whether it's cardiology or neuroscience or whatever it is, and they do it in just one sex, and they don't know whether it extends to the other sex or not, that's just so important, because either one or two things can happen. Either they repeat the study in the other sex, and it's true, and then they say, wonderful, great, now we have something that works in everybody and we're real happy about it, so they extend their findings, A. Or B, what happens is it doesn't extend. And that's extremely important to know, that a dose or a drug works in one sex and it doesn't work in the other. That's extremely important clinically to know. So I think the NIH is to be commended on pushing forward with this. And of course, the major thing is that when you look at the differences, sometimes you find something really interesting that can be dissected through and come up with a new treatment.
You're right. It sounds really important. I'm glad they saw it your way, and I'm glad it was your work that actually caused them to pay attention. The way you explain it, the logic is just crystal clear. It makes all the sense in the world to go ahead and test and do studies, both male and female. Otherwise, you're right. You have half an answer, and you really don't know which half is the right half. So
that's exactly right.
Makes sense. Dr. Vespel, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. We have some really special episodes lined up to take you through the rest of the summer, and then we have some surprises planned for the fall. So you might want to head over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find the best podcasts, and subscribe to the Real Talk MS podcast. I'll do my best to make it worth your while. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.